Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis, 53b of Maseches Kiddushin, the very last line of the page, where the Gemara says Amarav. And the Gemara is discussing the opinion of Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah with regards to a man who tries to be Mekadesh, tries to betroth a woman using hektish, using consecrated property. So the Mishnah had said that if he does it b'mezid, if he gives her the consecrated property as Kiddushin deliberately, he knows, he remembers, they both know that it's hektish. So then, according to Rabbi Meir, the Kiddushin works. But if it's b'shogeg, if they don't know, so then the Kiddushin doesn't work. And the Gemara last week had the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who explained that the reason it doesn't work by a case of shogeg is because they regret having done it. When they would find out that it was hektish that they had used for the Kiddushin, it was a question if both of them would regret it or only the woman would regret it. But either way, there would be a regret, which means that the whole thing was done b'taos, was done in error, and that's why the Kiddushin would not take effect. So, if it was done b'mezid, if it was done intentionally, so then the Kiddushin would work. Now, it's not his, so how could it work? It's hektish, it doesn't belong to him. So the way that it would work is when he's ma'al, when he misappropriates the hektish, it's mischalel. It becomes deconsecrated, and therefore it becomes his. It's forbidden for him to do that, but it becomes his as he transfers it to her. And again, we're suggesting, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that if he did it on purpose, so then they knew about it, they agreed to deconsecrate it, and then it would work. If he did it b'shogeg, unintentionally, they didn't realize that it was hektish, so then they wouldn't want that, and therefore it wouldn't deconsecrate it, and it would remain hektish, and there would be no Kiddushin. So the Gemara now says, Amarav. Rav says, top of the next page, Chazarnu akol tzadim shel Rabbi Meir. We've explored all the angles of Rabbi Meir's opinion, and really what he seems to mean is we've looked around all of Shas, all the different Mishnayos at Rabbi Meir's opinion, V'lo matzino, and we've not found this idea that hektish b'shogeg ein mischalel b'mezid mischalel. And we have no indication, we have no evidence that Rabbi Meir would hold that if a person would be ma'al with hektish b'shogeg, if a person would misappropriate hektish by accident without realizing it was hektish, that it wouldn't become deconsecrated. Rather, it seems that Rabbi Meir is consistent. He holds that, no, whether he did it on purpose, whether he did it by accident, the me'ilah occurs, it's a misappropriation of hektish, and the hektish is deconsecrated, and therefore the Kiddushin really should work. So, and that's true whether it was on purpose or whether it was by accident. We've never found anywhere else this support that Rabbi Meir would hold this. So then what's pshat? What's the explanation of the Mishnah? Why in our Mishnah does he say that if you give the hektish b'shogeg, if you give the hektish unintentionally, not realizing it was hektish, it's not a good Kiddushin? So Rav explains, Mishnah seinu b'kasnos kahuna shelo balu. We're talking about the tunics of a Kohen, tunics of Kohanim that have not yet become tattered, they've not worn out. What does that have to do with anything? So they're not worn out, meaning they're still usable. The Kohanim use these clothing when they do the avodah, when they serve in the Beis HaMikdash, but they're holy, they're sacred. But they're really only allowed to benefit from them when they're doing avodah, when they're doing service in the temple. As soon as they're finished, they are really required to take off the clothing and change into their own clothing, because otherwise they're benefiting from sacred clothing. But that's impossible because it takes time to change. And there will be time where they're wearing the clothing and not doing the avoda, not doing the service. How could they do that? They're benefiting from hektish. But rather, we say, Hoel v'nitnu lehanus bahen, since they are allowed to do that, they're allowed to benefit from them, because the Torah wasn't given to angels. These aren't like miraculous human beings that can just snap their fingers and the clothing is off of them. They have to have an opportunity to change, and it will take time, and they're going to be wearing the clothing when they're not doing avoda. So it must be they're allowed to, because the Torah wasn't given to angels. So what are they supposed to do? So they're not miracle workers. So they're allowed to. So, and so what the allowance really is, the way that we can describe it, is that as long as they're not intending to benefit from it, as long as it's what we might call shogeg, it's unintentional, so then we have a special allowance for them to benefit from these clothing. And it's not me'ila. It doesn't take away their sanctity when they use this clothing unintentionally. So says Rav, that's what the Mishnah was talking about. That's what Rabbi Meir was talking about. We're talking about the clothing of a Kohen, the special clothing of a Kohen that has a special allowance that you're allowed to benefit from it, and it won't become. It's not me'ila, it's not misappropriating it, and it won't deconsecrate it. That's the case of the Mishnah that he gave her Kiddushin with hektish. We're talking about what kind of hektish, what kind of consecrated property are we talking about? He gave her, it was a Kohen, he gave her his Kohen clothing for Kiddushin. But he didn't realize, he forgot that they were the special clothing. So it was shogeg. So, and the halacha, there's a special halacha when it comes to the clothing of a Kohen, that when you benefit from it b'shogeg, you don't transgress, and it won't become deconsecrated. And that's why it won't be a good Kiddushin, because it remains the property of hektish, it doesn't become deconsecrated. As opposed to if you did it on purpose, so then that is me'ila, that will deconsecrate it, and it will no longer be sacred, it will no longer be property of the temple, and it will be his property, and then when he gives to her, it's a good Kiddushin. That's if you did it b'mezid intentionally. But when it's unintentional, so then this is a special exception that it does not become deconsecrated, and therefore the Kiddushin will not be a good Kiddushin. The Gemara has a question on this from a Brisa. The Gemara says, Tashma, come and listen. The Brisa says, Kasnos kahuna shebalu, the clothing, the tunic of a Kohanim that have worn out, mo'alin bahem. There is me'ila if you benefit from them. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And my lav afilu lo balu, wouldn't we say, even if it's not yet worn out? The Brisa says, the Kohen's clothing, if it's worn out, there's me'ila. If he's not allowed to benefit from it. And the Gemara thinks in this question that it was trying to tell us the most novel case. Of course, if it's not yet worn out, and it's still usable, so then for him that's still holy, and for him to benefit from that would for sure be me'ila. But, and the Brisa is coming to say, and even if it's worn out and it's not usable anymore, still there's me'ila. But what we see is that if it's not, that the Kohen, the clothing of Kohanim, if you benefit from it, it is me'ila, and it would deconsecrate it. So that's a question on our suggestion. We're suggesting that there's no me'ila, at least when it's unintentional, but there's no me'ila on the Kohen's clothing. So the Gemara answers, no, balu dafka. We specifically mean when it's worn out. Because when it's worn out, it can no longer be used. If it can't be used anymore, it no longer has this special dispensation that, the Torah wasn't given to angels, so that they're going to have to wear it, at least for a few minutes, so they're allowed to benefit from it unintentionally. That's when it's still wearable. Once it's worn out and not wearable anymore, it loses that special dispensation. It maintains its kedusha, it maintains its holiness, and and it if you benefit from it, it's me'ila. But if that's because it's worn out and not usable anymore. If it's still usable though, so then you, like we said, the Torah wasn't given to angels, you have to be able to benefit from it a little bit, so there's no me'ila when you benefit from it unintentionally. Okay, now the Gemara asks from another brisa. This brisa is talking about actually something that's relevant this weekend, starting, I guess if this video goes out Sunday, so yesterday on Shabbos we'll have read Parsha Shkolim. Parsha Shkolim coincides with the beginning of Adar, right before Rosh Chodesh Adar, and because on Rosh Chodesh Adar they will remind people to bring their shkalim, their donations, their half shekel donations to the Beis HaMikdash, to send in their donations. Those donations were collected and will be used starting in Nisan for the public karbanos, the karbanos tzibor. So what would happen is they announce in the beginning of Adar, Rosh Chodesh Adar, that people should start sending in their money, and then they would use that collection for the karbanos. So they had a special collection, and it said on it the new shkalim, taklin chadatin, meaning that year's shkalim they would use for the karbanos. Now, let's say at the end of the year they had money left over from all the money they collected. They didn't use it all for the karbanos, so they would use that money for other needs and maintenance of the Beis HaMikdash. What if somebody never sent in their money, and they send it in late? They send it in this year, this Adar, let's say, for last year's collection. So in that case, instead of putting the money in the new box, because it's really money for last year's collection, they would put it in a different box that said, Taklin Atikim, the old shekalim. And that was used, like we said, that would go into the collection of shkalim of money that was used for maintenance of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Brisa says, Tashma, come and listen. Mo'alin bechadtin ve'eng mo'alin ba'atikim. There's me'ila on the new shkalim. If somebody would use the new shkalim collected for personal benefit, that would be me'ila. That would be this transgression of misappropriating hektish. But there's no me'ila on the old shkalim. That is the first opinion of the Brisa. Some have a girsa that says Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Some take it out, you'll see why, because it's hard to say that that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, as we'll see in a moment. Then it says Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir says, Mo'alin af ba'atikim, there's me'ila even on the old shkalim. Shahaya Rabbi Meir Omer, because Rabbi Meir would say, Mo'alin b'shiyarei halishka, that there's me'ila on the leftover collection. There's me'ila on the leftover collection. Now, like we said, what is that leftover collection used? What are the shkalim from last year used for? So they're used for maintenance and other things like the maintenance of the walls of Yerushalayim and the towers and other needs of the city of Yerushalayim itself. And it's inevitable that people will benefit from those, derive personal benefit from the walls of Yerushalayim. They might get shade or something like that. And yet still, Rabbi Meir is saying there is me'ila on that, if somebody benefits from it. And the Gemara asks, V'amai, why is there me'ila according to Rabbi Meir? Nema, we should say, Ho'il v'nitnu lehanos, since they are given to benefit from them, because the Torah wasn't given to angels. Because part of what they did with these leftover money, they did general maintenance, but they also did things to support the city itself, those city walls and the towers. So, Ditnan, like we learned in a Mishnah, the walls of the city and its towers, and all the needs of the city, they come from the leftover money from the Lishka, from this collection. So what we're basically saying is like this. We had these two boxes, right? One was used for the karbanos. Okay, so that's certainly, there's going to be me'ilah on that. That's money designated for offerings. There was another box, which is really last year's collection, whatever's left. Now that box was used for general maintenance, but including maintenance of things like the walls of Yerushalayim. Now, that came from hektish money, so you're not allowed to derive benefit from that intentionally. But it's inevitable that people will get benefit from it unintentionally. People will walk by the walls and the towers and get benefit, personal benefit even. So what would we say? So according to, if we follow the reasoning that Rav gave for Rabbi Meir earlier, we would say, okay, but it's the Torah wasn't given to angels. Yes, it's inevitable that you might benefit from it. Well, if it's inevitable, so then we have this special allowance that says, as long as it's unintentional, you're allowed to benefit. But if that's the case, then the money itself that's used to purchase those things, so that's what that money will have that same allowance. That money should have the same rules as what the money is being used for. And we should say about the money itself, the money that's collected, the taklin atikin, the old shekels, the last year's shekels, those shekels should not have me'ilah on them. If somebody uses them unintentionally, they should not transgress me'ilah because of this argument that it's inevitable that people will benefit from it unintentionally. And yet Rabbi Meir is saying that there is me'ilah. We have Rabbi Meir in this brisa saying, Ma'aling af ba'atikim, there's me'ilah even on the old ones, even on the last year's collection. So that seems to be a contradiction to the reasoning that Rav presented in Rabbi Meir, that Rav had said that the case of the Mishnah about the Kiddushin was where he gave her Kiddushin with the clothing of a Kohen, and since it's inevitable, you'll get unintentional benefit, so then there's no me'ilah when it's unintentional, when it's shogeg. So we should say the same thing here. As long as it's shogeg, there should be no me'ilah. So how come Rabbi Meir says that there is me'ilah? Says the Gemara, Lo tema Rabbi Meir, ela ema Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara answers, yeah, you're right, it can't be. That shouldn't say Rabbi Meir, it should say Rabbi Yehuda. So I don't know when we're allowed to do that, when we're not, but the Gemara feels that it has the flexibility here to reword the brisa that it was not Rabbi Meir who said this, but rather it was Rabbi Yehuda. And that's why, by the way, as I mentioned earlier, the girsa, the version that has Rabbi Yehuda making the first statement, is difficult. Because, according to the Gemara now, Rabbi Yehuda is the one making the second statement. And it's not Rabbi Meir, so we have no problem, we have no source that Rabbi Meir is saying anything contradictory to what we're suggesting, and Rabbi Meir can still maintain that in a situation where you'll inevitably get benefit from, unintentional benefit from hektish, so there's no me'ilah in that situation, as long as it's done b'shogeg, as long as it's unintentional. Says the Gemara Tashma, come and listen to another brisa. Ditanya, we learn in a brisa. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yitzchak, said, Avnei Yerushalayim shenashru, the stones of the walls of Yerushalayim that fall off. Mo'alim bahem, there's me'ilah on those. You can't benefit from the stones of the walls of Yerushalayim. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. So again, we could make the same argument. Why is there me'ilah? If you benefit from these stones unintentionally, b'shogeg, why is there me'ilah? It's inevitable that you'll get some unintentional benefit while they're on the walls of the city. So why is there me'ilah? So the Gemara answers, the Gemara answers, Lo tema Rabbi Meir, ela ema Rabbi Yehuda. Once again, the same thing. Don't say it's Rabbi Meir. Say that it is Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda who said that you can't benefit from the stones. Now, I'm not sure why the Gemara didn't give a different answer. The Gemara seemingly could have answered, I didn't look into this, but the Gemara seemingly could have answered that once the stones fall off, it's different. Just like we said about the clothing of the Kohen, that once it wears out, so then there is me'ila on it because it's not usable anymore. So, and there's no inevitable, unintentional benefit from it. So we should say that about the walls of Yerushalayim too. Once they fall off, the stones, there's no inevitable benefit from it. So the allowance for me'ila b'shogeg should also fall away. But that's not what it says. The Gemara once again rewrites it to read that it's not Rabbi Meir who said it is Rabbi Yehuda. Asks the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, if it is Rabbi Yehuda who said this, Yerushalayim mi mekadsha, does Rabbi Yehuda hold that the city walls of Yerushalayim have sanctity? That's not, but we're learning a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, if a person forbids something upon himself, with a neder, let's say, he makes a neder, he makes a vow in the following way. He says, this item should be forbidden to me ki'imra, like the sheep of the daily offering, or kidirim, or he says like the pen of hektish animals, or ke'etzim, or like the wood that's been designated for the mizbeach, or ke'ishim, or like karbanos, or kehechal, like the hechal, the main section of the Beis Hamikdash, or kemizbeach, or he says it should be like the altar, or he says ki Yerushalayim, or he says it should be like Yerushalayim, like the walls of Yerushalayim, that all of these things would work as a neder to compare this item and to make it forbidding. If I say it should be like this animal, this karban, so now it's forbidden like the karban. Say it should be like the altar, like the mizbeach, so now it's forbidden. And even if I say ki Yerushalayim like Yerushalayim, that's the first opinion of this Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol ha-omer Yerushalayim lo amar klum. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, if you say Yerushalayim, you haven't said anything. That does not forbid it. Now, so you see that he held that Yerushalayim was not forbidding. If you make a neder, you take a vow, and you say this should be forbidden to me like Yerushalayim, it doesn't. You haven't said anything according to Yehuda. It sounds like Yerushalayim doesn't have a special holiness. V'chitemana, you might say that if you have a careful reading of the Mishnah, he didn't say if you say it's like Yerushalayim. He said whoever says Yerushalayim. He left out the word like. So you might say v'chitema mishum de lo amar ki Yerushalayim. That he meant, since you didn't say it should be like Yerushalayim, that was his point. If you don't say like Yerushalayim, then it's not forbidding. If you just say it should be Yerushalayim, then it's not forbidding. But maybe he could agree that if you say it's like Yerushalayim, then it is forbidden. So no, V'atanya we have a brisa. The brisa says explicitly, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol ha-omer ki Yerushalayim lo amar klum. That anybody who says it should be like Yerushalayim, you haven't said anything. Ad sheyidor b'davar hakar Yerushalayim. Until you actually take a vow and compare it to something that is brought as a karban in Yerushalayim. So it's not enough to say it should be like Yerushalayim according to Rabbi Yehuda. It sounds like Rabbi Yehuda holds that there's no prohibition to benefit from the walls of Yerushalayim and such. So if that's the case, then how can we pin this Mishnah on Rabbi Yehuda? Again, we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah said, or Brisa, that Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak said that the stones of Yerushalayim that fall off, there's me'ila on them. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and that seemed to contradict the position that's being taken up by Rav regarding Rabbi Meir. Because again, Rav was taking up the position that anything that there's inevitable unintentional benefit, there's no unintentional me'ila on those items. So why is Rabbi Meir saying that there's me'ila on the stones of Yerushalayim that fall off? Those are things that you would have inevitably benefited from them unintentionally. There shouldn't be me'ila, at least not unintentional me'ila. So to that, the Gemara is suggesting, it's not Rabbi Meir, it's Rabbi Yehuda. So now we have a brisa though that shows that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold that Yerushalayim is forbidden. There's no prohibition in the first place to benefit from the walls of Yerushalayim according to Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara answers, top of the next page, Trei Tanai Ninhu V'Alibad Rabbi Yehuda. It must be there are two opinions about what Rabbi Yehuda held. One opinion held that Rabbi Yehuda holds that Yerushalayim does become forbidden, and if you would take the stones from Yerushalayim and build your house with them, that would be Me'ilah. And the other opinion held that the walls of Yerushalayim are not sacred and they're not forbidden to benefit from. And there's just two versions of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so that was all Rav's approach to the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Again, Rav was insisting that Rabbi Meir held there's really no difference in general between benefiting or misappropriating hektish, b'shogeg or b'mezid, whether by accident or on purpose. Either way, it's me'ilah, and it deconsecrates the item. And therefore, when he gives her kiddushin using hektish, really it should be a good kiddushin, whether it's intentional or unintentional, because it's me'ilah and it deconsecrates it. The one factor. So why did Rabbi Meir say in the Mishnah that it doesn't work when it's b'shogeg, when it's unintentional? Because he was talking about a case where he was using the clothing of a Kohen. Those have a special dispensation that there's no me'ilah when it's done by accident, and they will not become deconsecrated. That was all Rav's position. The Gemara now says, Amar Ula Mishmei de Bar Pada. Ula saying the name of Bar Pada. Omer Haya Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir would say, Hektish b'mezid mischalel, b'shogeg ein mischalel. He disagrees. He goes back and he argues on Rav. He takes the same position as Rabbi Yochanan did with regard to Rabbi Meir's opinion. And he says that when it comes to hektish, if you use it b'mezid on purpose, then it's deconsecrated. If you use it b'shogeg, if you forget that it's hektish and you use it, it doesn't deconsecrate it. V'lo amru b'shogeg mischalel. And when they speak about the idea, or really it means when the Torah speaks about the idea of me'ilah, b'shogeg, of misappropriating hektish by accident, and there's a carbon that one has to bring as a result, and you have to. So that's elolenian carbon. That's only with regards to carbon bilvad, only with regards to bringing a carbon. However, he's suggesting it does not deconsecrate the item. If a person benefits by accident, b'shogeg, from hektish, they will be chayav a carbon. They'll have to bring a carbon for an atonement, but the item remains in the possession of hektish. It's not deconsecrated. That's what Bar Pada is suggesting according to Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara asks, V'chi me'acher de'eng mischalel, but if it wasn't deconsecrated, carbon b'may mechayev. So what is it that's obligating him to bring a carbon? He didn't do anything. He didn't accomplish anything. If he tried to benefit from hektish, but it never left the possession of hektish, so then he didn't accomplish anything. Let's say our case, for example. He tried to give Kiddushin with hektish, but he didn't realize it was hektish. It was by accident. So nothing happened. So if nothing happened, because it was unintentional, so then why would he bring a carbon? He didn't do anything. He never accomplished anything. It's still hektish. It had no effect. So the Gemara rejects this possibility that you could be chayav a carbon, you could have to bring a carbon, but it didn't deconsecrate it. If it didn't deconsecrate it, that means it didn't work. If it didn't work, then why are you chayav a carbon? Ella, so rather, ki asa Ravin, when Ravin came, parish mishmei de Bar Pada, he explained what Bar Pada meant. Omer haya Rabbi Meir, that Rabbi Meir would say, hektish b'mezid mischala. When it comes to hektish, if you benefit from it intentionally, it deconsecrates it. B'shogeg, but if you benefit from it unintentionally, you don't realize it's hektish, ein mischalel. It does not deconsecrate it, and you won't even have to bring a carbon. So then what's the case of me'ilah b'shogeg in the Torah? The Torah talks about where you misappropriate hektish unintentionally and you have to bring a carbon. What is that case? Below amru b'shogeg mischalel elo le'inyan achila bilvad. When the Torah talks about me'ilah b'shogeg, that it becomes deconsecrated, that's with regards to achila, with regards to eating. Meaning, if you benefit from hektish and you consume something, or you use it up, so either you eat it, or it could be that it's a candle made of hektish and it burns up. Any type of benefit that one gets from hektish, so that's where there is me'ila b'shogeg, even unintentionally, and one will have to bring a carbon. But in a case where it's it's just a monetary transaction, you spent money, so then either, let's say we had the case last week where you try to buy something with hektish money. So is that me'ila? So he's saying no. He's saying, according to Rabbi Meir, it's not. Because what happens? So you give hektish money. Well, it's not your money, so there's no transaction. Again, if you do it on purpose, so that actually deconsecrates it. But if you do it by accident, Rabbi Meir is maintaining, if you didn't know it was hektish, so you regret having done it, which means it never took effect. Which means that it never took effect. There was no transaction, and if there was no transaction, then there was no me'ila. And so in that case, where it's just a monetary transaction with money of hektish, there would not be me'ila according to Rabbi Meir, and it would not be mischalal. It would not become deconsecrated, and that's really our case again of the Mishnah, where Rabbi Meir says that if you try to give hektish for Kiddushin unintentionally, so in that case, the Kiddushin wouldn't work because it's unintentional. There's regret; neither of them really want it, and it won't be mischala as a result. It won't become deconsecrated. If it's not deconsecrated, it can't work as Kiddushin, because it belongs still to hektish. It doesn't belong to the man to give to the woman for Kiddushin. The case where we can have that there's me'ila b'shogeg, where there's benefiting from hektish unintentionally, where one has to bring a carbon, that's where there is tangible benefit, or maybe even you need consumption, where I suppose tangible benefit would probably do the trick, but certainly where there's consumption, where he ate the hektish, so even if it was unintentional, it happened, or you burned a candle. Those would be cases where even if you didn't know it was hektish and it was unintentional, it's still me'ila, and that's where we would have a obligation to bring a carbon.